A few years back, around 2018, I was home from college for winter break. My name's Evan, and back then I was broke in the way only a college kid can be. No job during the semester, barely enough saved up, and a long break staring me in the face. So every winter, I did the same thing. I worked food delivery. Not because I loved it, not because it was fun, but because it was easy. No interviews, no managers breathing down your neck. Just you, a car, and an app telling you where to go. That year, I was staying with my Uncle Mark in a small town called Pine Hollow, a quiet place surrounded by woods and long, empty roads. He let me borrow his old pickup truck since my car couldn't handle snow very well. And that winter, it snowed a lot. The night this happened was a few weeks before Christmas. Thick snowflakes were falling fast, the kind that soak everything and make the world feel smaller. I remember standing in the driveway, brushing snow off the windshield, telling myself I'd only go out for a couple hours. Just enough to make some gas money. But once I started driving, the orders wouldn't stop. The snow had scared most drivers off the roads, which meant fewer people working and more money for the ones who stayed out. Every order paid well. Big tips, long distances. A kind of night you don't want to waste. I drove for about 3 hours straight. The heater was blasting. My hands smelled like fries and grease, and my eyelids were starting to feel heavy. I told myself I'd take one more order, just one, then I'd go home. That's when the app pinged. It was a late-night pickup from a fast food drive-thru on the edge of town. The drop-off address was about 20 minutes away. Normally, I would have skipped it, but the payout was too good to ignore. I glanced at the map and noticed it was in a neighborhood I didn't really know, way past where the streetlights ended. Still, nothing about it screamed danger, so I accepted it. The drive there felt longer than it should have. Snow piled up on the road, and my tires crunched loudly with every turn. By the time I got close, it was almost 11:30 p.m. The area was quiet in a way that felt wrong, like the sound had been sucked out of the air. The neighborhood was called Ravenwood Estates, and the houses there were massive. Not new, not flashy, just old looming structures sitting far apart from each other. Long driveways, tall trees, no fences, no sidewalks. It felt like driving through a place that had been forgotten. When I finally found the address, I slowed to a stop. The driveway was completely buried under snow, at least a foot deep. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing. I parked on the road and grabbed the food. As soon as I stepped out of the truck, the cold cut through me. Snow soaked into my shoes as I trudged up the driveway. Each step made a loud crunch that echoed way more than it should have. That's when I noticed the house. All the lights were off. Every single window was dark. No porch light. No glow from inside. It looked empty, abandoned even. As I got closer, I saw a piece of paper taped to the front door, flapping slightly in the wind. I climbed the porch steps and leaned in to read it. At the top, in thick red letters, was the word notice. Underneath it mentioned the county and something about the property being unoccupied. I didn't get far, because behind me, I heard something that made my stomach drop. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, crunching through the snow. I turned around. A man was walking toward me from the side of the house, near what I guessed was the garage. He came out of the darkness like he'd been standing there the whole time. He was wearing a dirty jacket that looked too thin for the weather, and his hair was cut short, almost down to the scalp. Trying not to sound nervous, I said, "Hey, food delivery." He didn't answer. He just kept walking. Something about the way he moved felt wrong. Not rushed, not casual, just steady. Like he already knew how this was going to end. When he got close enough, I could see his face clearly. His eyes were dark and tired, and they didn't blink much. He stopped a few feet away and held out his hand. I gave him the bag. He didn't say thank you, didn't nod, didn't turn toward the house. He just stood there, blocking the path back to my truck. The silence stretched on, broken only by the wind and the distant creak of tree branches. My heart started pounding. I took a small step to the side. "All right," I said, forcing a light tone. "Have a good night." I tried to walk past him. That's when he moved. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw his arm swing toward me. I stumbled backward, nearly slipping in the snow. He stepped closer, his boots sinking deep with each step. "Come with me," he said. His voice was low and rough, like he hadn't used it in a long time. I shook my head and backed away. The snow made it hard to move fast, and panic started creeping in. He followed me, his steps getting quicker. "Stop running," he shouted. I turned and ran anyway. My legs burned as I pushed through the snow, lungs screaming for air. I reached the truck, yanked the door open, and jumped inside. As I slammed it shut, I saw him reach the edge of the driveway. I threw the truck into reverse and sped off. In the mirror, I saw him standing there, perfectly still, watching me leave. I didn't stop driving until I was far away. My hands were shaking as I called the police. They went to check the house, but by the time they got there, the man was gone. Later, an officer told me the house had been empty for months. No owner, no residents, no reason for anyone to be there. I still don't know who that man was, or why he wanted me to go with him. But ever since then, whenever I pull up to a dark house late at night, with snow crunching under my feet and no lights in the windows, I feel that same tight knot in my chest. And I never stay longer than I have to. It happened a few years ago, back in 2017, and it's something I still think about whenever New Year's comes around. That year, I decided to spend New Year's Eve with two people I was really close to at the time. Not friends exactly, not family either. We were coworkers who had slowly turned into something like a small, awkward little support group. We worked long hours together, complained together, and somehow ended up trusting each other more than most people in our lives. Their names were Evan and Mark. None of us were into loud parties or packed clubs. Crowds made us tired, and honestly, we just wanted somewhere quiet where we could relax and forget about everything for one night. Since we all lived in tiny shared apartments, Evan suggested we rent a place for the night. Just one night. No guests, no noise. Just us. Mark found a rental online. It was listed as a rustic retreat, just outside a small mountain town called Pine Hollow. The photo showed a wooden cabin surrounded by trees, with snow covering the ground, and no other buildings in sight. It looked peaceful, maybe a little lonely, but in a good way. We met there on the afternoon of December 31st. I rode with Evan, and Mark drove separately. The road leading up to the cabin was narrow and poorly plowed, and the trees leaned in close on both sides, their branches bare and dark. The deeper we went, the quieter it got. No traffic, no houses, no phone signal. When we finally pulled up, the place looked older than the photos. The wood siding was faded and cracked in places, and the porch steps creaked loudly when we walked on them. The air smelled like wet leaves and cold pine. Inside wasn't much better. The furniture looked like it had been there forever, and the lights flickered when we turned them on. The silence inside the cabin felt heavy, like the building itself was listening. Still, it was cheap, and we kept telling ourselves we were only there for one night. The afternoon went by calmly. We talked, made jokes, and tried to ignore the way the wind kept tapping against the windows. As the sun started to set, Mark volunteered to drive into town to grab snacks and drinks. Evan and I stayed behind. That's when the first strange thing happened. We were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, barely talking, when there was a knock at the door. Not a friendly knock, not quick or light. 3 slow, heavy knocks. Evan and I stared at each other. No one was supposed to know we were there. The nearest cabin we could see was far enough away that it barely showed through the trees. I walked to the door and looked through the small window. A man stood outside, facing the door, completely still. He was tall, wearing a dark jacket and a hat pulled low over his face. I cracked the door open just a few inches, keeping the chain latched. Before I could say anything, the man spoke. "You need to keep it down tonight." His voice was flat, low, and sharp, like he was already angry. I told him we hadn't made any noise and that we weren't planning on doing anything loud. He leaned closer to the door, close enough that I could smell something sour on his breath. "I don't care," he said. "I don't want to hear you. Not even a sound." Something about the way he said it made my stomach tighten. It didn't sound like a request. It sounded like a warning. I nodded, told him we'd be quiet, and shut the door. Almost immediately, he knocked again, harder this time. We didn't answer. After a few seconds, his footsteps slowly moved away, crunching against the snow. When Mark got back, we told him everything. He laughed it off at first, but I could tell he was forcing it. None of us felt right after that. Night fell fast. Around midnight, while we were sitting at the table playing cards, we heard a loud clang outside, like metal hitting the ground. Then came the sound of glass exploding. We rushed to the window. The man was back. He stood next to Evan's car, holding a metal bat. The windshield was shattered, glittering under the porch light. He kept pacing back and forth, muttering to himself, swinging the bat at nothing, like he was working himself up. Mark shouted and ran for the door before we could stop him. The moment he stepped outside, a gunshot ripped through the air. Mark screamed and ran back inside, slamming the door shut. A bullet punched into the side of the cabin, spraying wood splinters across the wall. Another shot followed, then another. The man slammed the bat into the door again and again. Each hit shook the entire cabin. The lights flickered wildly. I remember thinking the door wouldn't hold. Then everything stopped. No footsteps, no voice, no movement. We waited for hours before police finally arrived. They never found him. No neighbors reported hearing anything. No one knew who he was or why he targeted us. We left before sunrise and never spoke about it again. But sometimes, when it's quiet, I swear I can still hear those slow, heavy knocks. It happened a few years back, during the winter of 2019, and I still think about it whenever I drive alone at night. At the time, I was working late evenings doing food deliveries. Nothing fancy, just running orders back and forth to make some extra money. That night, it was early February, one of those winters where the cold feels sharp and heavy, like it's pressing down on everything. Snow had been falling on and off all day, and by nightfall the roads were slick and shiny under the streetlights. It was almost midnight when this happened. I'd already been driving for hours, and I was exhausted. My eyes felt dry and sore, and my shoulders ached from being tense behind the wheel. I remember thinking, just one more delivery, then I'm done. I promised myself I'd go straight home after that. No shortcuts. No extra orders. I didn't trust myself to stay alert much longer, especially with the icy roads. The route took me down a side road that connected two small towns outside the city. Most people avoided it at night. It wasn't dangerous exactly, just lonely. For about 5 minutes, there were no houses, no gas stations, no stores. Just a narrow stretch of road cutting between dark woods on both sides. No streetlights either. Just my headlights and the snow blowing across the asphalt. That's when it happened. I don't even remember feeling sleepy at first. It was more like my brain just blinked. 1 second I was driving straight. The next my focus slipped away like someone flipped a switch. My hands were still on the wheel, but my thoughts drifted, heavy and slow. Then the car hit ice. I felt the tires lose grip, That awful sliding sensation where you know you're not in control anymore. I snapped fully awake, heart pounding, adrenaline rushing in too late. I tried to steer back onto the road, but the car didn't listen. It slid sideways and drifted off the pavement, down into a shallow ditch that ran along the edge of the woods. The impact wasn't violent. The snow softened it, thank God, but it was still enough to leave me shaken and breathing hard. My hands were trembling, and my chest felt tight as I sat there in the dark, listening to the engine idle. I tried backing out. Then I tried pulling forward. All I managed to do was sink the tires deeper into the snow. The car was angled awkwardly on the slope of the ditch, stuck fast. I knew right away I wasn't getting out on my own. I didn't even bother stepping outside. The wind was howling, and the woods looked like a solid wall of black beyond my headlights. Something about standing out there alone didn't feel right. That's when I noticed the headlights. They were far down the road, just two pale points of light glowing in the distance. At first, I thought it was another car passing through. I felt a small rush of relief. Maybe they'd stop. Maybe they'd help. But the lights didn't move. They just sat there, shining steadily, aimed straight down the road toward me. I watched them for several seconds, my stomach slowly tightening. Whoever it was, they weren't close enough to be helping, but they weren't so far away that they couldn't see me either. My headlights were lighting up the snow like a beacon. It felt strange, wrong. I pulled out my phone and called my older cousin, Mark. He lived nearby and was usually up late. When he answered, I tried to sound calm, but my voice shook anyway. I told him what happened, where I was, and that I was stuck. He didn't hesitate. He said he'd call roadside assistance and then drive out to meet me so I wouldn't be alone. Hearing that helped more than I can explain. I felt my shoulders relax a little, knowing someone I trusted was on the way. After we hung up, I looked back down the road. The headlights were gone. No fading glow, no movement, just darkness. That's when the fear really started to creep in. I stared hard into the black, trying to figure out if the car had driven off or if they just turned their lights off. The idea of someone sitting there in the dark, watching me, made my skin crawl. The silence didn't help. There were no cars, no voices, nothing. Just the wind brushing through the trees and rattling against my car. It felt like the world had shrunk down to just me and that empty road. A few minutes passed, maybe 3, maybe 5. Time felt slippery. Then I saw movement. A shape appeared down the road, stepping out of the darkness where the headlights had been. A person, walking slowly toward me through the snow. My heart started hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. The figure kept coming, crunching softly with each step. When they got close enough, I could see they were wearing a dark hoodie, pulled tight over their head. Their face stayed hidden in shadow, even in my headlights. They stopped about 15 feet from my car, and just stood there, not waving, not calling out, not moving at all. I locked the doors without even thinking. My hands were slick with sweat. I stared at them, my breath shallow, trying to read their body language. But there was nothing, no emotion, no intention I could see. After a moment, I gave a small, nervous tap on the horn, just enough to let them know I was inside, that I saw them. They didn't react. They just stood there, facing me, completely still. That's when panic started crawling up my spine. Every bad thought rushed in at once. Why weren't they speaking? Why hadn't they helped? Why were they here at all? I grabbed my phone and called Mark again. My voice was barely steady as I whispered that someone was standing outside my car. Before he could respond, the figure turned around. Without a word, they walked back the way they came and disappeared into the darkness. I stayed on the phone with Mark, my eyes glued to the road. Less than a minute later, headlights flared to life down the road again. A car began moving toward me, slow and deliberate. It pulled up across the road from where I was stuck and stopped. The lights shut off. I couldn't see anything beyond the ditch, but I heard a car door open. I was just about to ask Mark what to do when another set of headlights suddenly flooded my view. Mark's truck screeched to a stop right in front of me. I heard him yell, angry, loud, protective. Then another engine roared to life, and tires spun hard on the icy road. A car sped away into the night. Mark later told me the person had been holding something metallic, something long, like they were planning to pry my door open. If he hadn't arrived when he did, he's convinced things would have gone very differently. The tow truck came. My car was pulled out with barely a scratch. But I still wonder what would have happened if I'd been alone just a little longer. And every time I see headlights stopped on an empty road, my stomach drops all over again. Back in 2018, I was 22 and desperate for extra money. Rent in my town, Ridgeway Falls, had gone through the roof, and my daytime job at a pet supply store barely covered groceries. So when my cousin Evan mentioned that the gas station near the edge of town needed overnight help, I didn't think twice. I hated nights, hated being alone, and hated the dark even more, but bills don't care about fear. The place was called Pinecrest Fuel, and it sat right, where the neighborhoods thinned out and the woods started to creep in. During the day, it looked harmless. Just a squat little building with buzzing lights, a few pumps out front, and a long stretch of road that led toward quiet suburbs and empty fields. At night, though, it felt different. The darkness around it seemed thicker, like it pressed in from all sides. Evan worked the afternoon shift, so we'd overlap for about 30 minutes every night. That half hour was the best part of my shift. We'd joke around, complain about customers, and he'd always say, "You'll be fine. Nothing ever happens here." Then he'd leave, and the silence would settle in like a heavy blanket. This happened in late January, during one of those winters where the cold feels personal. Snow from a storm earlier that week still sat in dirty piles along the edges of the lot. The wind kept rattling the loose metal sign out front, making it creak and groan like it was about to snap off. By midnight, the place was dead. Maybe one car every 40 minutes. I passed the time wiping already clean counters, restocking candy bars, and watching the security monitors. The hum of the refrigerators and the buzz of the fluorescent lights were the only sounds keeping me company. Around 12:40 a.m., boredom got the better of me. I stepped away from the register and started lining up chip bags that were already straight. That's when I heard the door chime. It was sharp and loud in the quiet store, and it made me jump. A man had walked in without me noticing his car pull up. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark jacket that looked too light for the cold. His hood was up, even though it wasn't snowing anymore. He didn't grab anything. He didn't even glance at the shelves. He just walked straight to the counter and leaned over it, peering down like he expected someone to be hiding there. I stayed where I was for a second, watching him from the corner of my eye. Something about the way he stood felt wrong. Too still, too focused. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual as I walked back behind the counter. "You need help with anything?" He snapped his head toward me so fast it made my stomach drop. His eyes were wide, and for a split second, I swear he looked scared. Like I wasn't supposed to be there. "Oh, no," he said. His voice was shaky, like he hadn't planned on talking. "I'm good." He backed away from the counter, still watching me, then turned and left without buying a single thing. I stood there, frozen, listening to the door chime echo as it shut behind him. My heart was thumping hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I walked over to the window and watched him cross the lot. His car was parked at an odd angle, not in a real parking spot, just off to the side near the pumps. The engine was already running. He got in and drove off without turning on the headlights until he reached the road. That's when the uneasy feeling really kicked in. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe he was nervous. Maybe he forgot his wallet. But the way he looked around the counter, like he expected someone else to be there, wouldn't leave my mind. After pacing for a few minutes, I called Evan. He didn't answer. So I did the next best thing and called the non-emergency police line. I told them about the man, the weird parking, the way he acted. I felt silly explaining it, but the dispatcher didn't rush me off. She said an officer would swing by to check things out. I hung up and felt a little better, until headlights appeared at the edge of the lot. The same car rolled back in and parked in the exact same crooked spot. This time, it didn't turn off. I watched from behind the counter, barely breathing. The engine idled, low and steady. I could see movement inside now. Not just one shape, but two. One in the driver's seat, one in the passenger seat. I locked the front door so fast my hands slipped on the keys. The car just sat there. Minutes passed. The wind picked up, blowing snow across the pavement in thin, scraping lines. The sign outside let out another long creak. Inside, the lights flickered once, briefly dimming the store. Neither door opened. They were waiting. Every worst-case scenario ran through my head. I crouched behind the counter, keeping an eye on the security monitor. My phone was in my hand, ready to dial 911 at the first sign of movement. Finally, red and blue lights washed over the snow. The police cruiser pulled in and stopped directly behind the car, blocking it completely. The sudden brightness felt unreal, like waking up from a bad dream. The officers moved fast. They approached the car with hands on their holsters, shouting commands I couldn't hear through the glass. The doors opened. Two men stepped out. One of them was the guy from earlier. I watched as they were searched, questioned, and separated. Everything seemed calm on the surface. No shouting, no struggle. But then one officer opened the trunk. He froze. Another officer joined him, and their posture changed immediately. Serious, alert. Later, after they took the men away, one of the officers came inside to talk to me. He asked me to sit down. In the trunk, they'd found rope, duct tape, knives, and a metal crowbar. Everything neatly packed, ready to use. I felt sick. The officer told me that if I hadn't called when I did, things could have gone very differently. They weren't just thinking about robbing a gas station. I didn't finish that shift. Evan picked me up, and I didn't sleep for 2 days straight. I quit Pinecrest Fuel the next morning. Even now, years later, I can't pass that stretch of road at night without feeling my chest tighten. Sometimes I still picture that car idling in the dark, waiting, and I can't stop thinking about what would have happened if I'd stayed quiet. This happened a long time ago, back in 2009, when I was 26 and thought I was finally starting my adult life for real. My name's Evan, and that year I moved into a tiny rental house in a place called Pine Hollow, a quiet little town surrounded by woods and long, empty roads. It was hours away from where I grew up, and I didn't know anyone there except my landlord, who I'd met exactly once. I worked remotely as a freelance editor, which sounds nice, but it meant I spent most days alone. No coworkers, no small talk, just me, my laptop, and a house that creaked a little too much when the wind picked up. I told myself I liked the quiet. Looking back, I think I was just trying to convince myself. That year, Christmas crept up on me faster than I expected. My sister Lena lived across the country with her new husband, and my parents were dealing with health stuff and couldn't travel. We talked about me visiting, but I didn't have enough time off or money to make it work. So for the first time in my life, I was going to spend Christmas completely alone. On Christmas Eve, I decided to stay up late and work. I figured if I kept busy, the night would pass faster. I sat up in the living room with the lights low, my laptop glowing on the coffee table, music playing through my earbuds. Outside, the snow had been falling all evening, thick and quiet, the kind that swallows sound. Sometime close to midnight, I heard something that didn't belong. It was faint at first, a soft crunch, like someone stepping carefully on snow. I pulled one earbud out and held still, listening. My heart did that weird little jump when you realize you're not alone. The sound didn't come again right away, and for a moment I wondered if I'd imagined it. I stood up and looked around the living room. Nothing looked out of place. Still uneasy, I walked to the back window and peeked out. Just snow and darkness. Then I moved to the front window. Same thing. My reflection stared back at me, pale and tired. Finally, I opened the front door. Right there on the porch were shoe prints. Deep ones, fresh ones. They came straight up the walkway, stopped right in front of my door, then turned around and went back the way they came. There was no package, no note, nothing disturbed except the snow. I remember standing there longer than I should have, staring at those prints like they might move on their own. Who walks up to someone's house at almost midnight on Christmas Eve and doesn't knock? I locked the door, checked it twice, and told myself it was probably someone lost or drunk. Still, I didn't sleep well that night. Christmas Day felt wrong from the moment I woke up. The house was too quiet. No voices, no smells of food. Just the hum of the heater and the TV playing whatever was on. I made coffee, sat on the couch, and watched movies I barely paid attention to. I called my sister, joked about eating cereal for Christmas dinner, and tried to sound cheerful. By the time evening rolled around, the sky was already dark, and the wind was howling hard enough to make the windows rattle. I made a frozen dinner and was getting ready to turn in early when I heard it again. Crunch, crunch, footsteps. They were slow this time, careful, like whoever it was didn't want to be heard. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just sat there, staring at the front door. The sound stopped right outside. I swear I could almost feel someone standing there, listening. Then, after a few seconds that felt way too long, the footsteps turned and walked away. When I checked the porch, my stomach dropped. Another set of shoe prints. Same path, same pause at the door. That night, I refused to go to bed. I sat on the couch with every light on, TV blaring, telling myself I'd stay awake no matter what. But exhaustion has a way of winning. I woke up hours later to flashing light from the TV and a cold feeling in my chest. As I stood up and walked down the hallway, something felt off. The air smelled damp, cold. My bedroom door was open. I never left it open. My hands shook as I pushed it wider and turned on the light. Wet shoe prints covered the floor. They went from the window, across the room, and back again. Snow melted into dark stains on the carpet. I backed away slowly, my skin crawling. In the hallway, more prints led toward the living room, then stopped, right where I'd been sleeping. The police said it was probably a thief who thought the house was empty. But I know better. Someone was inside my home, watching, waiting, and sometimes, when it snows, I still think about those footprints and wonder how long they stood there, right outside my door. Let me tell you this the way I usually tell it, like we're sitting somewhere warm while it's snowing outside. This happened in 2017, during the dead stretch after New Year's, when everything feels quiet and off. My name's Lena, and at the time I was living alone in a small apartment building in a sleepy town called Maple Hollow. I'd taken a full week off work, mostly because I needed a break, but also because I figured everyone else would be back at work by then. Fewer people out. Fewer crowds. Just me, some errands, and a lot of doing nothing. The building I lived in was tiny. Only 4 apartments total. I knew everyone who lived there. My cousin Aaron lived on the ground floor. An older guy named Ron lived across from me. and a quiet woman named Marcy lived upstairs. That was it. No strangers ever came through unless one of us was expecting someone. That day had been slow and uneventful. Snow had been falling all afternoon, the thick, muffling kind that makes the world feel smaller. I drove around town, went into a few stores, bought snacks I didn't need, and enjoyed the calm. By the time I got back to my apartment, it was just after 7 p.m., and the sky had already gone black. Inside, my apartment felt cozy. The heat was on, the lights were low, and everything smelled faintly like the frozen pizza I'd made earlier. I changed into sweatpants, grabbed my snacks, and curled up on the couch. The TV droned on in the background, one of those shows you don't really watch so much as let wash over you. I remember feeling heavy and sleepy, my eyes closing for a few seconds at a time. Then, around 8:30, the building's PA system buzzed. It was loud and sudden, sharp enough to make me jump. The sound echoed through my apartment, the kind that immediately puts you on edge. The system meant someone was outside the main door and wanted to be let in. I wasn't expecting anyone. I waited, listening. The buzzing stopped. A few seconds passed. Then it buzzed again, longer this time, more impatient. I stood up slowly and walked to the front window. I didn't pull the blinds all the way up, just enough to peek out. A man was standing outside. He was big, broad shoulders, tall. Even through the snow and the dim light, he looked solid, like he took up more space than he should have. He wore a dark coat and a hat pulled low, and his face was hard to make out. But I could tell he wasn't young, maybe mid-40s or older. I knew, instantly, that I'd never seen him before. That alone made my stomach tighten. In a building this small, you notice unfamiliar faces right away. And if he was visiting someone, why wasn't he buzzing their apartment directly? The PA system buzzed again, louder this time. I stepped back, my heart thudding. I told myself it was probably nothing. Maybe he had the wrong building. Maybe he was confused. Still, I walked over to the PA panel and muted it. Then I sat back down on the couch and tried to shake the feeling crawling up my spine. For the next hour or so, nothing happened. I kept watching TV, though I wasn't really paying attention anymore. I nodded off a few times, jerking awake whenever a sound from the hallway or outside cut through the silence. Eventually, I turned the TV off and went to bed around 10 o'clock. I fell asleep fast. That's why the sound woke me so violently. It was a thud, deep and heavy, like something solid had slammed into wood. My eyes flew open, my heart instantly racing. For a few seconds, I just lay there, frozen, trying to figure out what I'd heard. The apartment was silent. No footsteps. No voices. No follow-up noise at all. I sat up slowly, listening. My bedroom door was closed, and beyond it was nothing but darkness. The silence felt wrong, thick, like it was pressing in on me. I got out of bed and crept toward the door, every step careful. I pressed my ear against the wood and held my breath. Nothing, just the faint creaks of the building settling, the low hum of heat moving through the pipes. I turned the knob slowly and peeked out. The living room was dark, shadows stretching across the floor. Everything looked normal at first, too normal. I didn't turn on any lights. I don't know why. I just felt like I shouldn't. I moved forward, barely making a sound, and looked down the hallway toward the front door. It was open, wide open. Cold air spilled into the apartment, carrying the faint smell of snow and wet pavement. I stared at the doorway, my mind refusing to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. I knew I had locked that door. I always locked it. I backed away slowly, my chest tight, and that's when I saw it. On my bedroom door, right near the knob, was a massive dent. The wood was cracked inward, splintered like something had hit it hard. My stomach dropped. That sound, The thud. Someone had been standing outside my bedroom door. I ran back inside, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone. I hid in my closet, crouched between hanging coats, and called the police in a whisper. Every second felt stretched out. I was convinced I'd hear footsteps again, or the handle turning, or another against the door. But nothing happened. When the police arrived, they searched the apartment. Then the building. They found no one. No footprints. No signs of where the man went. They think he buzzed every apartment until someone let him in. Maybe he got frustrated when my door didn't open. Maybe he didn't expect anyone to be home. What still haunts me is that dent. Just one hit. Not an attempt to break in. Just a single angry strike. Like he wanted me to know he was there. I still live in that apartment. The door's been replaced, but sometimes, late at night, when the building is quiet, I swear I can still hear that thud echoing down the hallway. Back in 2016, I was living in a small, creaky rental house on the edge of a quiet town called Pine Hollow. It wasn't a scary place on its own. Just old, drafty. The kind of house that always made strange noises, even when nothing was happening. For almost 5 years, I'd lived there with my cousin, Mark. We weren't super close growing up, but splitting rent made sense when we were both broke and trying to get on our feet. Over time, we both found better jobs and started making decent money. The house, though, never improved. The floors still groaned, the heater barely worked, and the place always smelled faintly like damp wood. Eventually, Mark decided he'd had enough. He moved out to get his own apartment across town. I didn't blame him. Honestly, I thought I'd leave too. But once he was gone, something changed. The house felt bigger, quieter, empty, but in a way that felt peaceful at first. I figured I'd stay another year or so and save up some money. That winter hit Pine Hollow hard. Early December rolled in with non-stop snowstorms. Thick, heavy snow that fell all day and night, piling up faster than anyone could shovel it away. Roads turned slick and quiet. Trees bent under the weight. Everything outside looked frozen and muffled, like the world had been wrapped in a thick blanket. My job let us work from home when the weather got bad, so I set up a little office in Mark's old bedroom. It still smelled faintly like his cologne and laundry detergent. I remember thinking it was strange how a room could feel occupied even when no one lived there anymore. That afternoon, while I was typing away at my desk, I heard a knock. Not loud, not aggressive. Just a firm, polite knock on the front door. That alone felt odd. Nobody ever came by, especially not during a storm like that. I walked down the hallway and opened the door just a crack. Cold air and snow rushed inside, stinging my face. Standing on the porch was a man I'd never seen before. He was bundled up in a thick gray jacket, snow clinging to his shoulders and hood. He looked normal enough, mid-30s maybe. Tired eyes, pale skin from the cold. He smiled, but something about it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sorry to bother you," he said. His voice was calm, almost too calm. My car's stuck down the road. Slid right into the snowbank. I don't have my phone on me. Any chance I could borrow yours? Every instinct in my body told me to be careful. I told him to wait a second and shut the door. I walked to the side window that faced the road. Sure enough, there was a dark SUV sitting crooked near the curb, half buried in snow. The tires looked useless, spinning grooves frozen solid. It should have made me feel better, and it did. A little. I grabbed my coat, slipped on my boots, and stepped back outside. I stayed on the porch, keeping the door behind me, just in case. I handed him my phone and watched him closely as he called someone he said was his brother. He spoke quietly, turning slightly away from me. I couldn't hear much. Just enough to tell was a real conversation. After less than a minute, He handed the phone back and thanked me. "Should be here later," he said. "Really appreciate it." Then he walked off into the snow and climbed back into his car. I watched from the window until I saw him settle into the driver's seat. Everything seemed fine, normal, boring, even. I went back to work and tried to forget about it. By the time evening rolled around, it was already dark outside. Snow kept falling, thick and heavy. Around 7 p.m., I shut my laptop and stretched. That's when I remembered the guy again. Something felt off. I looked out the window. The SUV was still there. At first, I thought maybe I was mistaken. But then I saw movement inside. A shadow shifting. Someone leaning forward, then back. He'd been there for hours. I told myself he was just waiting. Maybe his brother was stuck too. Snowstorms mess things up like that. Still, the feeling in my stomach wouldn't go away. I made dinner, sat on the couch, watched TV, tried to relax. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows and making the house creak and pop. Around 9:30, I headed upstairs to shower. The water had just warmed up when it happened. A loud, violent bang slammed through the house. Then another, and another. It sounded like someone was trying to break the door down. The noise echoed through the walls, sharp and aggressive. I could hear the door handle being yanked hard over and over. My heart started pounding so fast, I thought I might pass out. I stood there, frozen, water running over me, trying to decide what to do. The banging didn't slow down. It got worse, more frantic. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Complete silence. No footsteps, no voices, just the wind outside. I shut off the water, got dressed as fast as I could, and stepped into the hallway. The house felt different, heavy, like it was holding its breath. I crept downstairs and peeked through the window. The SUV was still there, but the man wasn't inside. I called the police with shaking hands. When they arrived, they found footprints all around the house, more than one set, leading toward the front door, leading away, some partially filled in by snow, others fresher. They ran the plates on the SUV and showed me a photo of the owner. It was the same man. They waited. Hours passed. Then days. No one ever came back for the car. To this day, I don't know who was pounding on my door that night. I don't know if it was him, panicking, trying to get inside, or someone else, chasing him through the storm. Sometimes, when I think about it too long, I remember how calm his voice was, how empty his smile felt. And I wonder if letting him use my phone was the moment I invited something into my life that I never should have. Because whatever happened that night in Pine Hollow, it didn't feel finished. It felt like it just disappeared into the snow. This happened back in 2016, when I was 22 and trying to keep my life together with duct tape and bad decisions. My name's Evan, and at the time I was working the night shift at a little gas station just outside a nowhere town called Ridgeway Crossing. The place sat off a long, empty highway, surrounded by fields that went on forever. During the day, it looked boring. At night, it felt like the end of the world. I worked the graveyard shift, midnight to 8 in the morning. My older cousin Mark had helped me get the job, and he worked the evening shift before me. We weren't especially close, but he was family, and that was enough. He hated nights and I needed the hours, so we swapped shifts that winter. It was one of those nights where the snow didn't fall gently. It whipped sideways, blown by strong wind, and stuck to everything. When I pulled into the parking lot, my headlights barely cut through the white haze. The whole place looked swallowed by darkness, except for the buzzing glow of the station lights. Mark's car was the only one there. I parked beside it, went inside, and we did our usual half-awake handoff. He complained about the cold, warned me the coffee machine was acting up, then left in a hurry. A minute later, his taillights disappeared into the snow. And just like that, I was alone. The station always felt bigger at night. Every sound echoed. The hum of the refrigerators, the tick of the heater, the buzz of the lights overhead. My boss, Darla, had left a handwritten list of chores on the counter. Mop the floor, restock the cooler, count cigarettes. Maybe an hour of work, tops. I decided to pace myself. Staying busy too early just made the night feel longer. Around 12:30, while I was leaning on the counter scrolling through my phone, I noticed headlights sliding into the lot. An old boxy SUV pulled up to one of the pumps. It looked ancient, like something from the 90s, with rust along the doors and a crooked antenna. I barely thought about it. People stopped by now and then, even in bad weather. I went back to my phone. 10 minutes passed. I glanced up again. The SUV was still there. No lights. No movement. No doors opening. No one pumping gas. That's when I started paying attention. I stood up and walked to the front windows. Snow blew across the lot in fast, sharp waves. I scanned both sides of the building. Nobody. If someone had been sitting in that SUV with the engine off, they would have been freezing. The wind was brutal. The kind that cuts through your clothes no matter how many layers you're wearing. I watched for a few more minutes. Nothing changed. The SUV just sat there, silent and dark, like it had been abandoned mid-thought. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, the cold slapping me in the face. Snow crunched under my boots as I hurried toward the vehicle. Up close, it looked worse. The windows were fogged slightly on the inside, but that could have been old condensation. I leaned toward the driver's window and knocked lightly. "Hey," I called out. "You all right in there?" No answer. I pressed closer and tried to look inside. The seats were empty. No bags. No keys in the ignition. The place where someone should have been felt wrong, like staring at a room that's missing furniture. I stepped back uneasy, and that's when I noticed the footprints. Fresh boot prints cut through the snow, leading away from the SUV. They didn't head toward the front door. They went around the side of the building, toward the back where the storage room exit was. That knot in my stomach tightened. I didn't follow them, not right away. My fingers were numb, and my breath came out in shaky clouds. I went back inside, locked the door behind me, and turned on the small heater under the counter. I held my hands over it, trying to calm down. I couldn't have been inside more than a minute when I heard it. A dull, heavy thump. It came from somewhere behind me. I froze. The sound wasn't loud, but it wasn't small either. It sounded like something solid bumping into something else, like a shoulder hitting a door, or a body brushing past a shelf. Slowly, I turned around. The store looked the same. Empty aisles, flickering lights. But when I stepped out from behind the counter, I saw wet footprints on the tile floor. Dirty water pooled where snow had melted off someone's boots. They hadn't been there before. My heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Each step I took felt loud, even though I was barely moving. The footprints led toward the back hallway, straight to the supply room. I stopped at the corner and peeked around. That's when I saw him. He stood half hidden behind a metal shelf, tall and broad, filling up the narrow space. He had a thick, tangled beard and dark clothes that blended into the shadows. I couldn't see his eyes clearly, but I knew he was looking at me. I could feel it, like being stared at by something that didn't blink. For a second, neither of us moved. Then something in my brain shut off. I turned around and walked back to the counter as calmly as I could, even though every part of me was screaming to run. I picked up the phone with shaking hands and called the police, whispering like he could hear me through the walls. The operator kept asking questions. I kept my eyes on the hallway, expecting him to step out at any moment. He never did. Those 10 minutes before the cops arrived felt endless. Every creak of the building made me flinch. Every gust of wind rattling the doors sounded like footsteps. When the officers finally came in, relief hit me so hard my knees almost gave out. I told them everything and pointed to the back room. They went to search while I stayed up front, gripping the counter. A few minutes later, they came back. No one was there. The back door was slightly open. Melted footprints surrounded it, and outside, fresh tracks led away from the building, straight out into the open field behind the station. No trees, no houses, just snow-covered land stretching into darkness. They couldn't search it that night. It was too cold, too dangerous. The SUV was towed, but here's the part that still bothers me the most. There was no record of it. No owner. No plates tied to a name. It was like it didn't belong to anyone. No one ever found the man either. Sometimes when I drive past Ridgeway Crossing in winter, I still look toward that field. And every once in a while, I swear I see footprints out there, leading nowhere, disappearing into the snow. Back in 2019, when I was 19, I was living with my older cousin Mark in a small town called Pine Hollow. It wasn't a place anyone passed through by accident. If you were there, it was because you lived there, or because you were lost. The streets were narrow. The streetlights flickered even on calm nights. And once the sun went down, the town felt like it emptied itself out. I was home from community college for winter break, bored out of my mind and short on cash. Mark worked nights at a warehouse, so most evenings I was alone. To make some extra money, I'd started delivering food using one of those delivery apps. Nothing fancy, just burgers, fries, and the occasional milkshake. That Friday night was especially quiet. No texts, no plans. Just the sound of wind rattling the windows and the heater clicking on and off. Around 6:30 p.m., I grabbed my jacket, told Mark I'd be out for a few hours, and headed into the cold. There had been snow earlier that day, and even though it had stopped, the roads were still slick and gray. The wind cut right through my coat, and the sky had that dull, heavy look like it was pressing down on everything. I took a few normal orders at first. Nothing weird. Just houses with porch lights on and TVs glowing through the windows. Then I got an order from a quick grill on the edge of town. I picked up the food, climbed back into my car, and checked the address. That's when I frowned. It didn't list a house number, just an intersection. Hollow Creek Road and Old Mill Drive. I zoomed in on the map. The pin sat right on top of a small gas station that had been half abandoned for years. Technically, it was still open, but barely. Most nights, no one was ever there. I remember saying out loud, "That's weird," and laughing it off like it didn't bother me. I figured maybe someone worked there, or their car broke down nearby. I hit the button to start the route and drove on. The closer I got, the quieter everything became. No music from passing cars. No people walking around. Even the wind seemed to die down. When I pulled into the gas station lot, my headlights swept over cracked pavement, faded parking lines, and dark windows. Not a single car was there. I parked near the back and stayed inside my car, gripping the steering wheel. The app said I'd arrived, so I waited. 30 seconds passed, then a minute, then 2. Nothing. I sent a message through the app saying I was there. My phone screen was the brightest thing around me. The gas station lights buzzed faintly, flickering like they might go out any second. I could hear the hum of electricity and the faint creak of something moving in the wind. After a few minutes, I stepped out of my car to look around. That's when the feeling hit me. You know that feeling when you suddenly realize how alone you are? Like the world has quietly stepped back and left you standing there? That's how it felt. The intersection was completely empty. No headlights in the distance. The nearby shops were dark, their windows black and lifeless. Even the gas station door was locked, I checked my phone again. No response. I told myself I was being dramatic and turned back toward my car. That's when I heard tires, slow, heavy, crunching over snow. A truck rolled into the lot, moving way too quietly for how big it was. It passed the gas pumps and pulled in close behind me, stopping just a few spaces away. The engine idled low, like it was growling. It was an old pickup, dark red, almost brown. Rust along the sides. Windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. My stomach dropped. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He looked wrong, not in a dramatic way, just off. His shoulders were hunched, his movements stiff, like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were filthy, layered and mismatched, hanging loosely on him. His beard was patchy, his face weathered and deeply lined. I lifted the food bag slightly and forced a smile, hoping he'd just take it and this would be over. He didn't look at the bag. He looked at me. His eyes didn't blink, not once. They stayed locked on my face as he started walking closer. Each step felt heavy, deliberate, too slow, like he was enjoying how quiet it was. Something inside me screamed to leave. My hands shook as I set the bag down on the ground between us. The second I did, his pace changed. He sped up, that was it. I spun around, ran to my car, and yanked the door open. As I started backing up, he reached my window. I didn't look at his face. I didn't want to see it up close. Suddenly, he stopped. He turned around, jogged back to his truck, and jumped inside. I thought it was over. Then his engine roared to life. I peeled out of the parking lot, tires skidding, heart slamming in my chest. In my mirror, I saw his truck lurch forward and chase after me. He followed me right to the intersection. I didn't even slow down. I ran the red light and kept going, breath coming in short, sharp gasps. For a full minute, he stayed behind me. Then, without warning, he turned off onto a side road and disappeared into the dark. I didn't stop driving until I reached the main road, where other cars were passing and streetlights actually worked. I pulled over, hands numb, and called the police. They took my report, asked questions, and told me they'd look into it. Nothing ever came of it. Sometimes I still think about that night, about how empty that place was, about how he watched me like he'd been waiting, and I can't stop wondering what would have happened if I'd hesitated even a second longer. That's the part that still creeps me out the most. Let me tell you this like I'd tell it to someone late at night, sitting on a couch with the lights low, maybe snow tapping against the window. Back in 2018, I was working delivery shifts for a small pizza place called Red Oven Pizza. It wasn't anything fancy, just a local shop wedged between a laundromat and a closed-down video store in a town called Briar Hollow. I wasn't in college yet. I was taking a year off, trying to figure my life out, and this job paid enough to keep gas in my car and food in my fridge. My cousin Eli worked there too, along with a couple of his friends. We were all drivers, though, so even when we worked the same nights, we barely crossed paths. You clock in, grab a stack of boxes, disappear into the dark, and come back smelling like cold air and cardboard. This happened a few weeks before Christmas, during one of those long snowstorms that doesn't look that bad at first, but just never stops. Snow kept falling, soft and quiet, piling up faster than the plows could handle. Orders kept coming in. People didn't want to go out, so we were slammed. I wasn't stressed exactly, but after hours of driving slick roads, my shoulders were tight and my hands ached from gripping the steering wheel. Around 9:40 p.m., the manager handed me 2 orders and said, "Good luck out there." He didn't smile when he said it. Both deliveries were way out past the edge of town, normally a 15-minute drive. That night, closer to 30. I remember sitting in my car, heat blasting, watching the snow smear across the windshield while my GPS loaded. The drive started normal enough. Streetlights, familiar turns. Then the road thinned out. Lights disappeared. The houses got older, quieter. This part of Briar Hollow always felt strange, like the town had just slowly given up on it. Most of the stores were boarded up. Windows dark. No cars on the road except mine. After a while, even the radio started acting weird. Static cutting in and out, voices warping for half seconds before snapping back. I turned it off. The first house was easy. A small place with a sagging porch and a single yellow light on inside. An older man answered the door. He was polite, soft-spoken, and tipped a couple of dollars. Normal. Harmless. I remember feeling relieved, like the night had reset itself. Then I put in the second address. Same neighborhood, but deeper. The road narrowed. Trees crowded closer. Houses thinned out until there were long stretches of nothing but snow-covered ground and dark woods. When I finally reached the address, I almost thought the GPS was wrong. There was just one house, sitting alone, wrapped in trees like it was being swallowed. No porch light, no driveway, just a dark shape against darker woods. I parked on the road. My car felt very small out there. I grabbed the pizzas and walked up to the door, snow soaking through my shoes. The quiet was heavy. No wind, no animals. Just my footsteps crunching too loud. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. After what felt like way too long, the door opened. A woman stood there, maybe late 40s. Her hair stuck out in odd directions, like she'd been sleeping hard. Her eyes were open wide, but empty, like she was looking through me instead of at me. No smile, no greeting. I told her I had her pizzas and gave her the total. My voice sounded thin in the cold. She took the boxes without a word and set them on a table just inside the doorway. Then she said, "Wait here," and disappeared into the house. The door stayed open. I could see inside just enough to know it was wrong. The lights were dim and yellow. The walls were bare. No pictures, no decorations. The air smelled stale, like damp wood and something sour underneath. A minute passed, then another. She came back holding a handful of cash. She counted it painfully slow, mumbling under her breath, losing track, starting over. Her fingers shook. Every few seconds, she glanced past me, over my shoulder, like she was checking something behind me. Then she started talking, asking how my night was, if it was busy, if I liked my job. Her voice was flat, but she wouldn't stop. Every answer I gave felt like it stretched the moment longer. My skin prickled. I wanted to leave, but something in her tone made it feel rude to interrupt, like she was keeping me stuck there on purpose. That's when I looked back at my car. A man was standing beside it. He was tall, broad shoulders, hood pulled low. He was bent slightly, shining his phone light into my driver's side window. One hand was on the door handle, testing it. My stomach dropped so hard it hurt. I turned back to the woman. Her face had changed. The empty look was gone. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were sharp and angry, like I'd ruined something. She lunged at me. Her hands grabbed my jacket, nails digging in, and she screamed, "Now!" The man bolted toward us. I don't remember deciding to move. I just did. I shoved her as hard as I could. She stumbled back into the doorway, hitting the table. The pizzas hit the floor. I ran, not toward my car, not down the road. Into the woods? Branches whipped my face. Snow sucked at my feet. Behind me, I heard him. Heavy boots, fast, close. His breathing was loud, rough, like he was right behind my ear. I ran until my chest burned and my legs felt like rubber. At some point, the footsteps faded. I didn't stop right away. I kept moving, terrified he'd catch up if I slowed down. When I finally stopped, The forest was glowing faintly under the moon. Everything was silver and quiet again, like nothing had happened. I stumbled until I found a road. My hands shook so badly, I dropped my phone twice trying to call for help. The police came. They found the man at my car, still trying to break in. Later, an officer told me they believed the woman and the man were partners, not married, not family, just desperate. The plan was simple. Keep me distracted, steal my car. Maybe worse if I noticed. I still think about that night when it snows. About how quiet it was. About how close I came to not making it back. And every time I pull up to a dark house now, I leave my car running. I still think about this whenever winter rolls around. Every time the air gets sharp and the snow starts piling up, my mind goes right back to that trip. This happened in 2016, and even now, I can picture every little detail way too clearly. Back then, my name was Evan, and I was in my late 20s. I needed a break from people, work, and noise. I just ended things with my girlfriend, and instead of going somewhere warm and crowded like a normal person, I did the opposite. I rented a tiny cabin near a frozen lake called Grindlehook Lake, way up north near a place locals called Pine Hollow Ridge. The cabin wasn't meant for comfort. It was meant for people who liked being alone. No TV, no internet. Just a single room with a narrow bed, a small wooden table, and a stone fireplace that popped and cracked whenever it got too hot. The nearest town was over an hour away, and the road leading to the place barely looked used. I usually went on trips like this with my cousin Mark, who loved ice fishing almost as much as I did. But this time, he canceled last minute because of work. I almost backed out too, but something about being completely alone felt necessary. So I went by myself. I planned to stay for 3 nights. No schedule, no pressure. Just fish, sleep, and let my head clear. The first day felt perfect. Quiet in a way you don't get anywhere else. After unpacking, I made coffee that tasted faintly like smoke from the fireplace. The cabin smelled like old wood and cold air. Outside, everything was buried in snow, so thick it swallowed sound. It felt like the world had been turned down to a whisper. I went to bed early that night and slept harder than I had in months. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. It was still dark, but the sky had that pale blue look that comes just before sunrise. I pulled on layers, stepped outside, and the cold slapped me awake. My breath came out in thick white clouds. The lake was about a 10-minute walk from the cabin, down a narrow trail that twisted through tall pine trees. Snow covered everything, and my boots made deep, crunchy prints as I walked. It felt peaceful, isolated, but in a good way. At the lake, I drilled through the ice, set up my gear, and settled in. Ice fishing isn't exciting to watch. You just sit there, listening to the wind and the ice shifting under you. Sometimes it creaks and groans, like the lake itself is breathing. I stayed out there for hours, barely moving, completely lost in my thoughts. By early afternoon, the weather started to turn. The wind picked up, and snow began falling sideways. That's when I decided to pack up and head back. As soon as I stepped off the lake and onto the trail, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There were footprints next to mine. Not animal tracks, boot prints, human ones. Same size as mine, maybe a little heavier. They ran right alongside my path from earlier that morning, keeping pace the entire way. Whoever made them had walked close, really close. I followed them with my eyes all the way back to the lake's edge. That's where they stopped, turned around, and went back toward the cabin. I remember standing there longer than I should have, staring at the snow like it might explain itself. No other cars, no other cabins nearby, no reason for anyone else to be out there. Against my instincts, I followed the footprints back. They stayed on the trail at first, but about 50 yards from the cabin, they suddenly veered off into the trees. No hesitation, just a straight line into the woods, as if whoever it was knew exactly where they were going. The trees swallowed the tracks after a while. I couldn't see where they ended. I went back to the cabin, locked the door, and told myself it was probably another fisherman. Still, I kept the fire going all evening, mostly for the comfort of the noise. Silence didn't feel as friendly anymore. After sunset, the cabin felt smaller. The shadows stretched and shifted with the firelight. The wind rattled the windows just enough to make me glance up every few minutes. That's when I heard it. Crunch, pause, crunch, slow footsteps in the snow, not hurried. Not lost, calm, controlled. I killed the fire and stood still, listening. The steps moved closer, circling the cabin. Whoever it was took their time. I eased toward the window and peeked out. A figure stood near the trees, wrapped head to toe in thick winter clothes. No face visible, just a dark shape against the snow. Then they turned and walked straight toward the cabin. I dropped to the floor as their boots stopped right outside the wall. The window frame creaked slightly as weight pressed near it. A shadow passed over me. I looked up just in time to see a pair of eyes staring back through the glass. They tried the window. Once, twice. I grabbed the knife from the table, my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped it. After one last hard pull, the person stepped back. Then they ran. I watched them disappear into the trees, following the same path as those footprints earlier. I didn't sleep that night. I packed everything, waited for the first hint of morning light, and left. I've never gone back to Pine Hollow Ridge, and I never will, because whoever that was didn't stumble onto me by accident. They were waiting. Back in 2014, I spent Christmas in a way I never expected, and honestly, I still think about it every December. That year, I was living with my cousin Evan. We weren't super close growing up, but we ended up renting a small, beat-up house together in a quiet town called Briar Hollow, just outside the city. I was taking some community college classes, and Evan was working nights at a warehouse. Money was tight for both of us, and neither side of our family was big on holidays anyway, so staying put for Christmas just made sense. The house itself wasn't anything special. One story, creaky floors, thin walls, and a front porch that always seemed a little too dark at night. Still, we tried to make it feel festive. We put up a tiny fake Christmas tree that leaned slightly to one side, hung mismatched lights, and exchanged a couple of cheap gifts we bought at a discount store. Nothing fancy, but it felt cozy enough. Christmas Day was quiet. No visitors, no big meals. Just the two of us eating leftovers, watching random movies, and joking about how weird it felt to have nowhere to be. Around late afternoon, Evan mentioned there was a party happening near the old college district downtown. He wanted to go out, see people, maybe have a few drinks. I told him to go for it. I wasn't feeling it. I felt worn out in a way I couldn't explain, like my body was tired, but my brain wouldn't shut off. Evan left just before sunset, joking that I was officially becoming an old man. Once he was gone, the house got very quiet, too quiet. I ate some chips, flipped through channels, and tried to relax. By around 8 o'clock, I couldn't sit still anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in, and the silence was pressing on my ears. Since everything was closed, I grabbed my coat and decided to take a walk. Briar Hollow was known for its Christmas lights. People went all out. I figured some fresh air might help. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, the kind that makes your nose sting. My breath came out in little clouds as I walked past houses glowing with red and green lights. Everything looked peaceful, almost too peaceful. No cars, no voices. Just the crunch of my boots on the sidewalk. I eventually wandered into Maplewood Park, a small park near our street. It had a winding walking path surrounded by tall trees that blocked out most of the streetlights. I'd walked through it plenty of times during the day, but at night it felt different. The shadows were thicker, darker. Halfway down the path, I noticed someone sitting on a bench. It was a man, sitting perfectly still. No phone, no movement, just sitting there under the trees. At first, I felt a little sad for him. Who sits alone in a dark park on Christmas night? As I got closer, he slowly lifted his head and looked straight at me. I can still see his face. His eyes didn't look angry or drunk or confused. They looked empty, like there was nothing behind them, no emotion at all. He didn't blink, didn't move, just watched me pass. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the cold. I sped up, pretending everything was fine, but my heart was pounding. I reached the end of the path and turned toward home. The entire walk back, I kept checking over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though the streets were empty. When I finally reached the house, I rushed inside and locked the door behind me. I kicked off my boots and took a deep breath, trying to calm down. That's when I heard it. A heavy thump against the front door. It happened so fast after I got inside that my stomach dropped. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, frozen, listening. Nothing. No footsteps. No voice. Slowly, I leaned forward and looked through the peephole. It was him. The man from the park was standing on the porch, inches from the door, staring straight ahead. His face was blank, just like before. His eyes were wide open, unblinking, like he'd been standing there for a while. I don't know why I did it, but I cracked the door open and asked if he was okay. My voice came out shaky. He didn't answer. He didn't even react. Just stared at me. I asked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I shut the door and locked it, my hands shaking. When I checked the peephole again, he was still there. After about a minute, he stepped to the side, out of view. That's when I realized the front window curtains were still open. Anyone standing there could see straight into the living room. The tree, the couch, me. I didn't want him to know where I was in the house, so I stayed perfectly still. My heart was pounding so hard, it felt like it might give me away. Then there was a loud, dull thud against the window. I jumped back just in time to see him lift a large rock and slam it into the glass. The sound was deep and hollow, like the house itself was crying out. Cracks spread across the window like spiderwebs. He hit it again, and again. Each time, his face stayed the same. No anger, no effort. Just that empty stare. I ran down the hall, locked myself in a bedroom, and called the police. While I was on the phone, I could hear the glass finally give way. Then the sound moved. The front door. Heavy bangs echoed through the house, followed by the splintering crack of wood. Between hits, everything went quiet, like he was listening. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. After what felt like forever, the noise stopped. When the police arrived, the man was gone. The window was shattered. The front door was damaged, with chunks of wood scattered across the porch. The officers said it was probably just someone drunk or high who wandered off. Maybe that's true. But I still remember those eyes. And every Christmas since, I make sure the curtains are closed. I've told this story a few times over the years, usually late at night when the room is quiet and nobody feels like interrupting. Every time I tell it, I still get that tight feeling in my chest. It doesn't matter how much time has passed. Some nights stay with you. Back in 2017, I was working as a deputy for a rural county not many people have heard of. I'd already been on the force for about 8 years by then, long enough to think I'd seen it all. Drunk drivers, domestic calls that turned ugly, accidents that replay in your head when you're trying to sleep. I thought I was hardened to it. I was wrong. That winter refused to let go. Snow had melted weeks earlier, but the cold hung around like it didn't want to leave. The kind of cold that creeps through your coat and settles into your bones. That night, I was assigned to solo patrol on a stretch of highway that cut straight through miles of forest. No towns, no gas stations, just trees, darkness, and the sound of tires on asphalt. Most highway shifts were dull. You'd maybe pull over a speeder or sit in your car drinking bad coffee and counting the minutes. I was halfway through my shift, just past 2 a.m., when something caught my eye. A car. It was parked way off on the shoulder, farther than most people would bother to pull over. No headlights. No hazard lights. Just sitting there like it had been dropped out of the dark. I was sure it hadn't been there earlier. That alone made my stomach tighten a bit. I passed it before my brain fully caught up, so I took the next exit and doubled back. By the time I returned, about 15 minutes had passed. The car was still there, silent and dark. I parked behind it, leaving some distance, and kept my headlights on. I radioed into dispatch, letting them know I was checking out a possibly abandoned vehicle on the southbound side of Old Mill Highway. Nothing urgent. At least, that's what I told myself. As soon as I stepped out of my cruiser, the quiet hit me. No wind, no animals. Not even the usual hum of distant traffic. Just my boots crunching softly on gravel. The car was old. Really old. The paint was dull and flaking, and rust had eaten away at the edges of the doors. It looked like something that should have been in a junkyard, not sitting alone on a highway in the middle of the night. I shined my flashlight through the driver's window. Empty, no keys, no purse, no phone. But when I swept the light across the back seat, my grip tightened. Clothes, a messy pile of them, shoved against the door. A thin sweater, jeans, something lacy that made my stomach turn when I realized what it was. They looked like they belonged to a young woman. And they didn't look packed. They looked tossed. Like someone had been in a hurry. Or scared. I moved around to the passenger side, trying to convince myself there was a normal explanation. Maybe someone got a ride. Maybe they walked to a nearby house. But this stretch of road didn't have houses. Not for miles. That's when I heard it. A soft crunch. Not loud. Just enough to notice. It came from behind me. I froze. Then another sound. Slow. Careful. Like someone trying very hard not to be heard. I turned fast and aimed my flashlight toward the woods lining the road. Tall trees packed tight together, their branches weaving into a wall of black. The beam cut across trunks and brush, but the moment the light hit the trees, the sound stopped. Dead silence. My mouth went dry. I knew what I'd heard. Those were footsteps. Someone was out there. Sheriff's office, I called out, my voice louder than I meant it to be. Step into the light. Hands where I can see them. Nothing. I waited a few seconds and shouted again. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The woods didn't answer. They just stared back at me. I radioed dispatch again, this time asking for backup. I didn't say it out loud, but I was scared. Truly scared. The kind of fear that makes you feel small. If someone had dumped that car, and if something bad had happened to the person who owned those clothes, then whoever was hiding in those trees had a reason to stay hidden. A reason to stop me. I pulled my gun and moved behind the car, using it as cover. My flashlight shook just a little as I scanned the tree line. Every shadow looked wrong. Every gap between trees felt like a place someone could be standing, watching, waiting. Minutes dragged by, 5 of them, maybe more. Each second felt stretched thin. Then headlights appeared behind me. Another deputy, a guy named Lucas, pulled up fast. The second his car lights flooded the area, I heard it again. Footsteps. This time they weren't slow. They were running. Crashing deeper into the woods, snapping branches, disappearing into the dark. Lucas and I searched the car together. Up close, It was worse. Scratches on the inside of the door. A dark stain on the floor that neither of us wanted to say too much about. We also found an empty box of ammunition under the front seat. That changed everything. Whoever ran into the woods might have been armed. Searching the forest in the middle of the night suddenly felt like the worst idea imaginable. So we didn't. We secured the scene and waited for daylight. The next day didn't bring answers. The car wasn't registered to anyone we could find. No missing person report matched the clothes. Footprints in the woods vanished after a short distance, like whoever made them knew exactly where to go. No body. No suspect. No explanation. Years later, I still think about that night. About the way the woods went quiet. About how someone stood just out of sight, listening to me breathe, watching me circle that car. Sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night, I'll pass a dark shoulder of road and feel that same chill crawl up my spine. And I can't help but wonder if someone is still out there, standing just beyond the reach of the headlights, waiting to be noticed again. I want to tell you about something that still creeps me out when I think about it. It happened back in 2019, and even now, years later, I can picture every detail like it just happened yesterday. That winter, a few days before Christmas, I rented a small house through a rental app while I was visiting my Aunt Marlene. She lived in a quiet town called Pine Hollow, the kind of place with long streets, old trees, and barely any traffic once the sun goes down. I didn't want to crowd her house, so I found a place about 10 minutes away. The pictures looked normal enough. Beige walls, simple furniture, nothing fancy. Just a place to sleep for the week. I arrived in the early evening, right as the sky was turning gray-blue and the air smelled like snow. The house looked exactly like it did online. A single-story place with a small porch, a narrow driveway, and one flickering porch light that buzzed softly. The neighborhood was quiet. Too quiet, actually. No kids playing, no dogs barking. Just stillness. Inside, everything felt fine. Not cozy, but not bad either. The air felt a little stale, like the house hadn't been opened in a while. I remember telling myself I was being dramatic. I unpacked, made a frozen dinner, and watched TV until I felt sleepy. Around 10 p.m., I locked the doors, turned off the lights, and went to bed. That's when the first strange thing happened. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up slowly, the way you do when a sound pulls you out of a dream. I didn't sit up. I didn't even open my eyes right away. I just listened. From downstairs, I heard a dull thump, then another. Not loud enough to sound like a crash, but not soft enough to ignore either. It sounded like someone bumping into a wall. On purpose. I lay there, heart beating a little faster, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Old houses make noise. Pipes knock. Wood shifts. That's what I told myself. Still, I stayed very still, listening hard. After a minute, the sound stopped. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. Eventually, I fell back asleep. By morning, I'd pushed the whole thing out of my mind. Sunlight makes everything feel safer, you know. I texted Aunt Marlene to let her know I'd arrived, and we planned to have dinner at her place that night. I spent the day lounging around the house, scrolling on my phone, half watching TV, enjoying the quiet. Late that afternoon, I grabbed my jacket and keys and headed for the door. The moment I opened it, I nearly screamed. A man was standing on the porch, close, way too close. I froze. My hand was still on the doorknob. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just stood there, staring at me with dull eyes. He looked thin, almost hollow, and his clothes were dirty, like he'd slept in them for days. I finally found my voice and asked, can I help you? He didn't answer. He just nodded once, slowly, like he understood something I didn't. Then he turned and walked away, down the porch steps and along the sidewalk, never looking back. What really got to me was this. He hadn't knocked. He hadn't rang the bell. That meant he'd been standing there silently, waiting, while I was inside. I locked the door and left for dinner, trying to shake the feeling crawling up my spine. When I told Aunt Marlene about it, she laughed it off at first, then went quiet when she saw my face. She said Pine Hollow had its share of weird people, but that didn't make me feel better. That night, I drove back to the rental later than planned. The street was dark, lit only by a few weak streetlights. As I walked up to the house, I scanned the yard, the porch, the windows. Nothing looked out of place. Inside, I dropped my keys on the counter. Then I heard it. Thump. Louder this time. Closer. It came from the side of the house. I held my breath. Another thump followed, harder, like someone throwing their weight against a door. My stomach dropped. I took a slow step toward the sound, my hands shaking. That's when I heard breathing, slow, heavy, right on the other side of the door. I didn't scream. I didn't yell. I turned and ran. I bolted out the front door, jumped into my car, and locked it so fast my hands hurt. I called the police while my heart pounded in my ears. I sat there, staring at the house, terrified the front door would open. When the officers arrived, they searched the house. A few minutes later, one of them came back and told me the truth. Someone had been hiding in the garage. There was a side door to the garage that I didn't even know existed. It had been left unlocked by a previous guest. The door into the house showed fresh damage, like someone had been trying to break it down. I never stayed there again. I checked into a motel that night, slept with the lights on, and left Pine Hollow as soon as I could. I still don't know if the man on the porch was the same one in the garage. What I do know is this. While I slept upstairs, someone was right below me, listening, waiting, trying to get in. And that thought still makes my skin crawl. It was the winter of 2013, right at the start of January, when this happened. I remember it clearly because I was staying at my older cousin Mara's place while she was out of town. She lived in a quiet little house just outside a small town called Pine Hollow, the kind of place where the woods press right up against your backyard, and the nearest neighbor is far enough away that you can't see their porch light at night. Mara had asked me to stay there, to keep an eye on the house while she visited her boyfriend in another state. I didn't mind. I was in my early 20s, had a few days off work, and thought it might be nice to unplug for a bit. No roommates, no traffic, just a fireplace, a couch, and a whole lot of snow. That day had been bitterly cold, the kind of cold that sneaks into your bones and refuses to leave. Snow had been falling since the morning, and by afternoon, the wind started to howl. I spent most of the day inside, moving from room to room in thick socks, checking off little chores Mara had left me. Feed the cat, bring in more firewood, make sure the pipes didn't freeze. I kept the TV on for background noise, mostly news stations talking about the weather. They warned about heavy winds, whiteout conditions, and a possible blizzard rolling in by nightfall. I remember laughing to myself and saying out loud, "Yeah, no kidding," while watching snow slam sideways into the windows. By early evening, things got worse. The sky turned that strange gray color that feels heavy and wrong, like the world is holding its breath. Around 7, I switched channels, but the sound outside was louder than anything on the TV. The wind hit the house in hard bursts, rattling the siding and making the roof groan. It honestly sounded like someone was walking around outside, dragging something heavy through the snow. That's when I decided to look out back. The backyard was huge and sloped down toward a narrow road that barely anyone used in winter. No fence, just snow-covered ground, bare trees, and darkness. When I first looked out, I could barely see anything at all. Snow whipped through the air so thick it felt like staring into static. Then I saw movement. At first, I thought it was a shadow from the trees. But then it moved again, slower this time. A person was walking across the yard. They weren't running. They weren't struggling. They were just walking, one step at a time, like it was a normal summer evening stroll, instead of a freezing storm that could kill someone in minutes. Their shape was dark and blurry, but I could tell they were heading straight for the road at the edge of the property. I stood there longer than I should have, pressing my forehead against the cold glass. My stomach felt tight. Nothing about it made sense. No car tracks, no flashlight, no heavy winter gear that I could see. And that road? It didn't lead anywhere useful. Just miles of empty trees and abandoned land. The snow swallowed them up before I could get a better look. I tried to shake it off. Told myself it was probably a lost hiker or someone drunk and making bad choices. Still, my skin felt prickly. I went back to the couch, turned the volume up, and tried to focus on anything else. 5 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not aggressive. Just 3 slow taps. My heart jumped straight into my throat. I stood there, staring at the door, hoping maybe I'd imagined it. Then came another knock. Same rhythm, calm, patient. When I finally opened the door a crack, cold air rushed in so fast it stole my breath. A man stood on the porch. He was tall and thin, wearing a thick coat that looked old and stiff. His face was pale, almost gray, and his nose was so red it looked painful. His eyes were what stuck with me most. They were wide, unblinking, and locked onto my face the second the door opened. "Hey there," he said, smiling. His teeth chattered as he spoke. "Sorry to bother you. I'm waiting on my sister to come pick me up. Any chance I could warm up inside for a few minutes?" His voice was calm, almost friendly. Too friendly. I hesitated. My mind raced. I thought about Mara trusting me with her house. I thought about the man I'd just seen walking through the yard. I thought about how cold it was and how dangerous it would be to leave someone outside in weather like that. "I can't let anyone inside," I said finally. "But you can wait on the porch. I've got a jacket I can bring you." The smile on his face slipped for just a second, just long enough for me to notice. Then it came back, wider this time. "Yeah," he said. "Sure, that's fine." He moved to the side and sat down on a wooden chair near the door. I locked the door behind me and went upstairs to grab an old coat from the hall closet. It smelled like dust and mothballs, but it was warm. As I came back down the stairs, something felt wrong. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind sounded muted, like it was holding back. I reached for the lock, then stopped. I don't know why. I just froze. Instead of opening the door, I leaned forward and looked through the peephole. The chair was empty. The man was standing inches from the door, his face so close I could see every crack in his dry skin. One hand was already on the handle. The other was raised, like he was about to knock again, or maybe push. He was smiling, but his eyes were flat and cold. I stumbled backward and nearly dropped my phone dialing emergency services. I whispered my address, my voice shaking so badly I could barely speak. I didn't take my eyes off the door the whole time. When they said help was on the way, I looked through the peephole again. The porch was empty. No footprints. No movement. Just blowing snow. The police arrived later and searched the area, but they found nothing. No tracks, no reports. No sign anyone had been there at all. I stayed up the rest of the night with every light on, a fire roaring, and a chair pressed under the doorknob. Sometimes, when the wind hits just right, I still think about that smile. And I wonder how long he would have stood there if I hadn't looked through the door first. This happened a few winters ago, back in 2016, when I was driving out to see my old college roommate, Evan. We hadn't talked much in years, but he'd moved to this tiny town to start over after a rough breakup, and I promised I'd visit. He lived way out past the edge of anything familiar, nearly 14 hours from where I was living at the time. Normally, I try to do long drives in one push. No hotels, no stopping unless I have to. That trip was different right from the start. Winter came early that year. The weather forecast said light snow, which always sounds harmless until you're actually in it. When I left that morning, the sky was dull and gray, the kind of gray that feels heavy. Snowflakes drifted down slowly, almost calmly. I remember thinking, this won't be so bad. It got worse the farther I went. By late afternoon, the snow was coming down thicker, swirling sideways when the wind picked up. The road signs were half covered, and the trees along the highway looked like dark figures standing just beyond the headlights. Everyone on the road slowed to a crawl, gripping their steering wheels like they were afraid to let go. About 8 hours in, I checked the clock and felt my stomach sink. It was already after 9 at night, and I wasn't even close to halfway there. My shoulders ached. My eyes burned. I should have stopped hours earlier, but part of me kept thinking just a little farther. Just keep going. That's how bad decisions usually start. The snow eased up a little, but it didn't matter. It had already piled up on the road, and I hadn't seen a single plow truck all night. By midnight, my hands were shaking from exhaustion. I knew if I kept driving, I'd end up in a ditch. So when I saw a faded sign for a motel at the next exit, I took it without thinking twice. The place was called Pine Hollow Motor Court, though there were no pine trees anywhere nearby. It sat alone beside the road, like it had been forgotten. The building was long and low, with maybe 10 rooms total. The paint was peeling, and the sign buzzed softly. Half the letters burned out, so it barely lit up the snow beneath it. The parking lot was wide and strangely clean, like the snow hadn't been disturbed at all. I parked close to the office and stepped out into the cold. The air felt thick and quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound stand out. My boots crunched loudly as I walked inside. The office was tiny. One desk, one flickering light. No one there. A little cardboard sign sat on the counter. It said, "Be back in 15 minutes," with a faded picture of a coffee mug underneath. I remember letting out a tired laugh, because of course, the one time I needed help, no one was around. I waited a minute. Then another. Nothing. I went back to my car, rubbing my hands together to keep them warm. That's when I noticed something that made my chest tighten. The parking lot was empty. No other cars, no tire tracks, no footprints. Just smooth, untouched snow stretching all the way to the road. It didn't even look like anyone had checked in recently. The motel felt unused, like it wasn't really open at all. I got into my car and turned the heater up high. The engine's hum was the only sound. I told myself the clerk might live nearby. Maybe they walked off somewhere. Still, the longer I sat there, the more uneasy I felt. There were no other towns close by, no gas stations, no lights in the distance, just darkness and snow. I meant to stay awake. I really did. But my head kept nodding, and my eyelids felt like they weighed a ton. At some point, without even realizing it, I fell asleep sitting upright. What woke me up wasn't a sound at first. It was the feeling of being watched. My eyes snapped open, and for a second, I didn't know where I was. Snow slammed against the car as the wind rocked it gently side to side. I turned my head toward the motel office and saw a face inches from my window. A man was standing there, his breath fogging up the glass as he stared inside. His eyes were wide and unblinking, like he'd been watching me for a while. I flinched so hard, I slammed my elbow into the door. The man stepped back and shouted something I couldn't understand, his voice rough and sharp. That's when I saw the truck. It was parked farther back in the lot, dark-colored and splattered with mud. Another man climbed out, pulling his jacket tight as he walked toward me. He didn't look surprised to see me. If anything, he looked annoyed. The first man started circling my car, yanking on the door handles. The sound echoed way too loudly in the empty lot. Click, click, click. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I threw the car into reverse and hit the gas. The tires spun uselessly, screaming against the ice. Snow sprayed everywhere, but the car didn't move. One of the men laughed. The other yelled something about breaking the window. A second later, the back window exploded inward. Glass sprayed across the seats. Cold air rushed in. One of them reached through the broken window, his arm stretching toward the door lock. I could see his sleeve brushing the glass, hear him breathing hard. I rocked the car forward, then back, then forward again, praying for traction. My hands slipped on the wheel. My mind felt like it was buzzing. Just as the man shoved half his body inside, the tires finally caught. The car lurched forward violently. The man lost his grip and fell backward into the snow. I spun the wheel, barely keeping control, and shot toward the exit. I glanced in the mirror just in time to see the other man jumping into the truck, trying to follow. But once I hit the main road, they stopped. They didn't chase me. That scared me more than if they had. I drove for hours after that. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I didn't even look for another motel. When the sun finally came up, my hands were still shaking. I know I made mistakes. I know I shouldn't have slept there. But that place felt like a trap. Like it was waiting for someone tired enough, alone enough, to make the wrong choice. And sometimes I wonder how many people did, because Pine Hollow Motor Court wasn't just empty. It felt hungry.